Hello and welcome to part 7 of my look at the Hyperkin Retron5. In this installment, I will be talking about the Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Super Game Boy portions of the Retron5. This won't be covering the Game Boy Advance, as that's going to be in part 8. So, in this installment, let's get right into it and start covering some games. So, we got a lot of games. First one we got up is the most iconic game on the Game Boy. This being the pack-in game Tetris. Anyone who's old enough to remember Tetris will instantly know that the Game Boy version is probably still the best game ever made. Tetris is an amazing puzzle game. It's a game that can appeal to anyone, whether you're a man, woman, child. It doesn't matter if you're boy, girl, man, woman, whoever. This is the game that really put video games from being like a kid's thing to being something that everyone did. And thanks to the success of Tetris, you had games that would come later and would be basically the casual market. This is the ultimate game that could be played by anyone, and anyone. It didn't matter if you played video games previously or not. This was something that was very simple to learn, and there's still people out there, even to this day, and where the only game they've ever played is Tetris. Alright, so let's move on. Tetris works perfectly. Next up is one of my personal favorite childhood memories. Here's Speedy Gonzales on Game Boy. Made by Sunsoft. If you're going to make a Speedy Gonzales game, well, what kind of game are you going to copy from? Sunsoft decided it was a good idea to copy from the best games that made use of a fast character in the early 90s, and that of course was Sonic. So Speedy Gonzales on Game Boy is essentially a Sonic the Hedgehog clone. But that's not a bad thing at all. If you're going to copy someone, make sure you copy something good. I have many fond memories of it as a child playing this game on like card trips and stuff. If you don't believe me that this game is a Sonic the Hedgehog copy, just check out that. It's also got a cool layer of parallax scrolling in the sky there. It's a simple effect, but really cool. Love me this game. Alright. Next. Here's Zelda DX. Or, actually not Zelda DX, this is the original Zelda. Now, the reason I'm loading the original here is because I first want to show off original Game Boy games and how they perform on the Retron5. Notice that slowdown? That slowdown does occur on the real hardware, but not to the same extent. This is something that's emulator related. It's not so bad, it doesn't really affect the game too much, but it is something to be worth mentioning. Now, I don't have the power bracelet yet, so I can't get over this rock. But because I have the initial Game Boy version, not the Game Boy Color remake, I can do things like warp. Hehehe. So let's do that again. Yay! But guess what? I don't have any. None. So see what I just did? I shouldn't be able to be anywhere over here at all. I should be heading towards the forest. Alright, let's move on. Next is a European game, and one that is actually pretty rare. But Game Boy games are region-free, so this will run just fine on the Retron5 when it's clean. Oh, come on. There we go. Here is Sunsoft's Trip World. Trip World is made by the same people who made Gimmick, and it's very similar to Gimmick in the fact that it is over-the-top brilliant. It's pretty obscure, it has amazing music, and just has the most crazy attention to detail in the sprites that you'd ever see in a Game Boy game. There's all this animation in sprites that only appear once. It's crazy. So in Trip World, you play as basically a prototype Pikachu. I mean, just look at this thing. You know, Trip World predates Pokemon by several years, so, you know, it's not a copy of Pokemon by any stretch of the imagination, but, you know, just look at this thing. It's Pikachu. It just is. Now I get powers to throw flowers at people. Be a jerk to people. You lose your powers after a set period of time. Then you go back to your kick. Now the Game Boy couldn't really do transparencies, so in the water, the underwater effect is just turning the sprite on and off just really quickly with a flickering effect. My camera might not even be able to pick that up. Whoops. I suck at these things. There we go. There we go. Yay, I succeeded. And just look at this enemy. Attacks me with a parasol. And I never seen that enemy again in the entire game. Check this, now I can fly. Run away. Kick. 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 Yay, victory. Alright, now let's move on. Trip World is really, really good. Super Game Boy games. First one we got up is the one that first comes to mind. If you probably know anything about Super Game Boy, this is the one that you'll probably be thinking of. Here is Donkey Kong 94. What makes Donkey Kong 94 so good is that Mario has new skills he can do. So much so he can essentially cheat. thing to note here is that Pauline does not scream for help like she would on a real Super Game Boy. So this is a failing of the emulation software running on the Retron 5 here. If it was hardware accurate to the original Super Game Boy... There, I survived that. Again, this game's awesome. So what I was saying is, if it was hardware accurate to the original Super Game Boy, Pauline would scream for help. Oh, I died. What the other thing I'm going to do is go back to the main menu here and go to Game Specific Settings and turn the borders on. Now this is something that the 2.0 firmware adds that's pretty neat. You can turn on the original Super Game Boy borders and make the Game Boy screen a bit zoomed in. Or about zoomed out, I should say. This would like basically emulate the look if you were using a real Super Game Boy. So let's try it on World 1-1, which is the first city stage. Oh, whoops. I think Mario died. Alright, well let's move on. Next up is another Game Boy, or Super Game Boy game I should say. One of my personal favorites, here's Kirby's Dream Land 2. So what I'm going to do here is go to Game Specific Settings and take the borders out. And let's play some Kirby's Dream Land 2. Also note that the crowd in the background is not clapping like it would if you were using a real Super Game Boy, so those enhanced sound effects are missing. Hopefully Hyperkin will fix that in the future. Let's move on. Next, we're going to try one of my favorite games for the Game Boy, but I'm going to have to mute the audio here because this is a Capcom game and it's a Mega Man game, and Capcom loves to copyright claim all these Mega Man game videos that use any music from them. So, rest assured, the audio does work. I'm just going to show. See, it works. I've just got it muted. So here's Mega Man 5. One of the greatest games, and the only one that doesn't directly copy from the Famicom and NES games. This one has its own bosses and own enemies that aren't taken from anything else. The Super Game Boy functions work perfectly. The game runs at full speed. There's no weird slowdown. And it's fun. You know, it's Mega Man. What more can you say? Now, you might be wondering about how the color palettes are assigned here. Well, this is a Super Game Boy game, so color palettes are automatically assigned. You know, they have like a custom palette because the games are specifically made for the Super Game Boy. But in general, you can adjust this to be whatever you want. If I could go to the Game Specific menu here, Game Specific settings, you go to hardware type, you can change this between Auto, Game Boy, Color Game Boy, which is Game Boy Color, or Super Game Boy, and then you can adjust, you know, the colors from the original Game Boy. Gives you that green scale thing. Original Game Boy Advance SP, that's the Game Boy Advance SP's internal colorizations, or you can choose the Game Boy Color modes. So just for instance, I'm going to choose original Game Boy, and let's put it on GB, and this would boot the game again. Now it's going to be in its original appearance, as if it were as if you were playing this on the original brick Game Boy. I don't know why you'd ever want this, but it's here, and you know, it's very nostalgic in sort of like a primitive way. Oh, look how primitive the graphics were back then. You know, you didn't even have black and white. You had green and black. And that's what passed for, you know, portable gaming back in the day. Oh, how times have changed. You know, but this is playing this, you know, on a beautiful HD TV and not playing it on like a little LCD screen with a horrible refresh rate and, you know, no backlight. So it would be even harder to play this on the original system. But we somehow managed back in the day that we did that, and we loved it. A Game Boy forever. Alright. And once you quit the game, the next time you play it, it will also remember the previous save slot, or the previous palette swap, or palette slot that you used. Here's another one that I'm going to try. Here's Space Invaders. Unmute that. Space Invaders. You can have two different modes here. You have Super Game Boy or you have Arcade. First, let's check out the Super Game Boy mode. So this is a port of Space Invaders 95 to the Game Boy. So we can play it in color. Yeah. This game is so advanced. Alright, now let's go back to, let's hit the reset button, and let's check out the other mode. It says Arcade here. And what this is if you put this game into a real Super Nintendo with a Super Game Boy, it puts the original arcade ROM and has that running off of the Super Nintendo hardware. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't currently work with the Hyperkin Retron5. The Retron5 will just eternally say, please wait, but nothing will ever come of it. So, you know, here's a game that is incompatible, or at least has half the mode incompatible. It'd be really cool if they could get that working, but, you know, they'd have to work on emulating the Super Nintendo hardware in with the emulator for the Super Game Boy, as well as, you know, just the game itself. So, for now, it doesn't work. Okay, now let's move on to some Game Boy Color games. First one we got up. Here's Pokemon, specifically Pokemon Yellow. Hey look, it's that thing from Trip World. What Pokemon did I have back in the day? Flying. Alright. It's, I don't know where we're going. Fuchsia City, okay, sure. Good old Generation 1. Fly and use fly! Oh snap! Victory! Alright, moving on. Let's check out a black cartridge Game Boy game. These are Game Boy Color games that are backwards compatible with the original Game Boy. So we're going to play some Shadowgate Classic by Kemco. Some Shadowgate. Yeah. All right. Alright, moving on. Now here's a test to see just how much action can be going on with the Retron5 at once for a Game Boy Color game. Here's Warlocked. See, I told you. Warlocked is basically a Warcraft clone to the Game Boy. Pretty amazing considering that they put a real-time strategy game on the Game Boy. play, let's load my Beast campaign. Because that. I think these humans are kind of screwed. Alright. Ridiculousness aside, that's pretty awesome. Now here's Donkey Kong Country for Game Boy. Now, I thought Donkey Kong Country for Super Nintendo was pretty damn impressive. So, when it came to the Game Boy Color in 2000, my mind was just blown. I mean, like, just check this out. Yes, it makes some concessions, but this is essentially Donkey Kong Country, but for Game Boy. Alright, let's keep going. Now here's a game that some people have reported problems with. Note that the internal saving doesn't work. So this happens with both Zelda Oracle of Ages and Seasons. I own both games, and neither one will boot the save game. So I gotta start this afresh. Start it fresh. My name is Lynn. Yes, Lynn. That is definitely correct. So this game works completely fine. It's just the save doesn't work. Alright, and one last game to test. And that is my favorite game ever. So anyone who knows me, but following my blog or anything, they know what this game is going to be already. But if you don't, surprise, it's Shantae. The game that everyone now loves, but nobody bought back in the day, except for me, because I'm crazy like that. So, note that this game works, but it works in its original Game Boy mode, or Game Boy Color mode. It doesn't have the Game Boy Advance enhanced features, which is too bad. Hyperkin should definitely add that in for the future. This is my favorite game ever. So anyway, that'll about do it for this video, guys. So thanks for watching. If you have any questions, you can leave those in the comment section down below. Also be sure to hit the like button. Other than that, yeah, I'll see you around for part 8.